Hello, everyone. Welcome to what I'm assuming will be a short little demo working on some watercolor techniques, 1 and 2 color tones to accentuate just how many tones you can get out of basic watercolors and how you can combine these to make even more colors. So, as you can see, I hope you can, it's very light. I went ahead and drew a little bird, or the front of a bird. I'm going to do a quick plug for my family over in Puerto Rico. This bird I drew is based off of this. So my aunt Magdalena Aviles, which I call Titi Malen or Aunt Malen, makes these wonderful paper mache. Well, actually, these are not paper mache. These are clay pieces, and she does traditional birds of Puerto Rico. She has a whole bunch of them. As you can see here, we have another example, and she makes them, and they're super cool. And she gave me a whole box of them as a gift one year, and I've been using them as demo pieces in my classes for a couple of years now. And so I took this feller right here and kind of did a very quick light drawing of the character right here. I don't know if people can see it. There it is. You can see there's not a lot of detail, not a lot of work right there. That's on part of the method to my madness, is that I didn't do too much work on it so that we can do a lot of delineation and design using color. I wanted to focus on watercolors, specifically washes today, and I'm going to be using just 2 little bits of watercolor. I'm using Scarlet, and I am using Blue Azure as my colors. I picked bottles from the Artist Loft series. And for those of you who have not used these type of watercolors, I want to accentuate why I enjoy using them, and also the type of things that you can get out of watercolor work. So I have many things here to prepare. I have a whole thingamajig of like brushes, pens, and sort of stuff, but I'm not using everything. I have a cup full of water. Here it is. Oh my goodness. And I have all sorts of paints over here, but I'm hoping that for this particular demo, I won't be using anything other than this amount. I wanted to also showcase just how much color you can get from a smaller set of colors like this, because the beauty of watercolor is that it can last for quite a while. So I'm going to go ahead, grab a brush, kind of a smaller brush. I'm going to dip it in water for a little bit. I should do it right here. Oh my gosh. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of my blue. And I'm going to start kind of blending a little bit of water with my blues. Another thing I have is I have some paper towels just to clean up my piece right here. But I'm going to start delineating my piece with my blues. I'm going to go ahead and put my little bird figure right over here. So for my students who are either taking my water-based media class or are doing my independent study class with me, they may have seen some of my PowerPoints on this subject, but the beauty of watercolor, and the reason why I love it so, is that it is both unforgiving and extremely forgiving. And what I mean by that is because it's a resin that activates via the use of water, you can add water at different points and create different tonalities. Starting off, putting down some of my bluish tones first. And as you can see, I am laying down my tones based on the contour of the figure. If you look at the bird, the wing and the feathers are laced backwards in tonality with the shoulders and headpiece. it follows the silhouette of the figure pretty closely. So I wanted to make sure that my first pieces, my first construction, followed that as well. Now, I'm not going to add color to this at all. I'm just simply going to use the color that already exists on my piece. I'm going to start throwing line work down like so. And one thing you'll immediately notice is that depending on the amount of water that you add to your piece, you can get tonalities of darker shades of blue all the way to lighter points, which can help preserve your figure. Also, if you're putting down strong lines with your watercolors to create your borders, you can use those very same lines to kind of drop down a little bit more tonality. So you can see I can put stuff right here. Look at that. Starting to take shape already. So, why do I like washes? Well, it's mostly because the vibrancy of these tones will be a lot stronger than with regular watercolors. I'm sure you've all, at some point or another, have played with watercolors in the past. You've used different watercolor types since you were a kid or anything like that, and usually the colors tend to be a little bland or a little light. Well, with tubed gouache watercolors, sorry, my Spanish just came in there for a minute, you can get stronger tonalities depending on the amount of water that you add. Like right now I'm doing my undertones first, really putting in some of those darker blues and light blues to actually create the form of my piece. And then using my water to actually set up the shapes that I want to incorporate. Have a little bit of water here and a little bit more watercolor. The other thing that I love about watercolor that puts it in the same area as say something like oils is that it does continue to be usable past its point past a particular point. Like for example, if these pieces, let's say these watercolors, which you can see I had a little bit of watercolor placed in there and it's still pretty much there. I haven't used all that much to create what I've done so far, just because all I really need is just a little bit, like just a dash, like right over here, and then to add water. And really I can just go in and really add my forms. But to say my watercolor, the piece actually dries, these pieces, by adding water, I can still get color out of them. It's a very cost-effective form of illustration because it is, in terms of traditional illustration, because it is water reactive. You can keep using watercolor all the way through, and you can do a lot of tones and visuals using very little material. Alrighty, start working a little bit on that beak, working little parts at the same time. So we're going to move it down here, and we're going to throw a little line right here. And then in here, I'm looking at the beak of the bird. It's a little disattached. I gotta talk to my aunt to see how best to fix that part. but a little beak. And then the bird eye kind of goes into here. It's starting to take form ever so lightly. If you are my student, you already know that I make noises when I draw, and if you're not, there you are. Now you know I do. The other thing to remember when using watercolors is that although in most paints, and if once I get to my acrylics demo, you'll see that I use white as a color directly from a tube to add whites on a piece. With watercolor, a lot of times I just let the actual white of the paper, of the watercolor paper, shine through, because by adding tones of lights and shadows and water all the way throughout, you can create that feeling of like shine and sheen that almost feels uncurved and like straight up connected to the actual texture that's supposed to be implied. You see already we're already working on our beak. Starting to look at it from different areas. Let's see if that works a little bit more. Let's start seeing what I'm going to do over here. And if you get a lot of water on your piece, that's why you want your paper towels present, so you can actually do a little bit of work like that. But yeah, I start adding a little bit of line work up here. Try not to make it too rough up in that area. And then really look at that front right here and kind of add our lights and shadows right there. And there's a bit of this piece, I just went in with the brush a bit more, where using the lightness of the brush will also help to create distinctions in terms of lights and colors. For example, this part right here will later on be affected by red, but I wanted to add some blue tonalities so that later on we can create some contrast between light and dark. But you're getting the sense already of how the bird is starting to look. Let's see it right here. Yeah. Let's start working on the eyes a little bit. Based on the piece that we have right here, he has quite a big set of eyes. Because of the nature of the watercolor itself, you can actually see that you can use watercolor to really create the illusion of lights and shadows on a piece, and also specifically on a pupil. I do a lot of inking with brushes, so I tend to like the structure and texture of brush work, both in watercolor and in ink work. One of the great things about both is that they can replicate the illusion of hair or feather or waviness in a way that's a little bit more authentic than, say, just using quills or microns. That's not to say you can't make effective hair with microns. I've done that too. But with watercolors, you have that nice sense of movement that a brush can provide. Alrighty, so I did a little work with my blues here, and we could definitely make this entire piece monochromatic, use different tonalities of lights and shadows, but I wanted to also play with the idea of using different color tones, or just 2 color tones, to really cement how best to represent this particular piece. And with doing that, we can go in here and start adding some color tones with our reds. I'm going to do a little bit of contrast with our reds, and we're going to first start with the area that's least affected by blues. Let's start working with those in. See over here, this area right here, we're starting to create a contrast point between your lights and shadows. By just combining 2 colors with watercolor, actively you're creating a 3rd color. Keep working a little bit over here in this area. That might be a little rough there. Let me see if I can spread that out just a little bit. There we go. The other good thing about watercolor is that it does dry pretty quickly. As you can see here, see how it's starting to change tonality just by placing the watercolor so close? Let's see how we can do over here. One of the things that you have to remember is that your rules of design don't necessarily change just because of the materials you use. Lights, your choice of light sources, your choice of composition, your texturing, all that stuff remains the same. All you just have a new material, new medium to use it in. Let's go and start doing some coloring in areas that have blues connected to it with our reds. Let's go see what happens when you go and do this. Dun, 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 dun. See, by adding that extra dash of color on top of the blues, because it is watercolor, it starts blending in already. So it starts creating a different tonality already within your blues, which makes it a little darker. Gives it a little bit more weight, especially in the central points. And if it starts getting away from you in terms of the reds, guess what? Add blues! And suddenly, it starts turning more into shadows. bit of that purpley in there to like ever so slight contrast there. See, by going over certain areas like right here, you can actually flatten that image and make it nice and blended. That way can actually work a little cooler. You can go right here and add some darker spots for your eyes, and then also some reds. About adding those in there is to create real lights and shadows, eh? And another advantage of all of this is that it dries pretty quick. I don't know if the lighting is hitting it pretty particularly well, but I just want to make sure that people can see. It's a little shiny right now because it still needs to dry. You can see right there what we're doing. A little bit of water. Go. And let's say you want to soften this down, just add some water, like straight up water, and you can kind of take a little of this blue and pull it in. There's a little bit more contrast there. The paint is actually malleable, pretty consistently malleable, so you can actually move things around relatively quickly. So going in here a little bit more with some blushing. Now, you can do plenty of work with one brush. This guy right here is the one I've been using. But different brushes can have different effects. And if you want to create something where your environment's a little bit more in use, getting a larger brush can help you create like a little bit of a world for a piece. Let's see what we can do over here. Start throwing lines down, like blending it just a little bit. Going back in over here and just blending. And then maybe with a smaller brush, like so, this guy right here, you can go in and kind of spread some of this blue. Closer to your pieces. And give a nice little background on your piece. And if you want to, grab a little of that red, wash it out as much as possible. Just add a little bit of it in there. And then grab your big brush. Wet that bad boy up. Clean that up. And go in and just start blending that thing. Now you have some nice contrast in your background. Through. And yeah, sometimes you're gonna get these little things that's happening in the corner. You can see little dots in there. That's the actual pores of the paper lifting up because you're basically putting wet on wet. I'm using watercolor paper for those of you asking. And but once it dries, you can wipe that stuff out. And yeah, in a future piece, I'll put this up once it's completely dry. But I want to kind of get a sense of what it is that we're doing so far here. You see the tonalities and the changes done on one particular piece just using watercolor. And yeah, I'm sort of moving the watercolor around in my hand too. Lots of things you can't do that too. But yeah, this is a nice little demo on how to use two colors to create multiple tonalities on a piece and also to bring them out. In future demos, I will be incorporating a little bit more color. My philosophy with watercolors is that a little bit will go a long way. So if you can use a couple of pieces or a little bit of watercolor here and there, you should be able to get a nice piece out. So yeah, I'll be posting this pretty soon. I'll be making it available to my students first. And yeah, see you next demo.